The Gloriana Set by ThebeMoon. Chapter 74. The Trial. Sunday morning found Hermione in the library researching wizard lore and nursing a hangover. As predicted, the Slytherin party had done her reputation no good at all. She and Draco were truly finished, according to rumour, and Hermione Granger was now a witch on the prowl. Cormac McLaggen stopped by her table and had to be discreetly hexed into leaving.
"Hermione?"
asked a familiar voice. She looked up from her book of famous Wizengamot cases to see Ernie standing behind the opposite chair.
"May I join you?"
She put down the book and looked at the head boy over, from fitted black jumper to close-cropped dark hair and hazel eyes. His jaw was set with a rare determination, and his hands empty of book. Ernie wasn't here to study. Hermione almost said no, but Ernie was her friend and she couldn't just bounce him off. So she nodded and he sat opposite her, hands folded on the table.
"I spoke to the headmistress this morning," Ernie said. "She'd never heard of a Marcus Fix, and our only transfer student this year is that second-year girl from Ilvermorny."
He frowned.
"Clearly some Slytherin snuck him in. Fix probably isn't even his real name."
"Probably not," Hermione agreed.
"That wizard had no right to take advantage of you like that."
Ernie went on, looking uncharacteristically fierce.
"He's trouble and—"
"Don't worry, Ernie," she said quickly. "I never want to see that face again." Ernie blinked, but the sincerity in her tone must have convinced him, because he dropped the subject entirely. Instead, he gave her a small smile.
"I enjoyed dancing with you last night,"
he said, a light flush spreading on his cheek. "I did too, very much." Hermione really had. Looking back, her dance with Ernie had been the most relaxing part of the whole screwy evening.
"Hermione,"
Ernie swallowed.
"I thought perhaps you'd like to have dinner with me tonight. In Hogsmeade, the Spangled Vale."
He paused and seemed to lose his nerve.
Workington, of course,"
he continued with a hint of his old pompous tone.
"I need to brainstorm ideas for the school's holiday celebration. We'll have the usual, caroling and skating and feasting, but I thought perhaps an inter-house activity like making wreath with all 4 house colours, or tree ornaments, or—" The head boy rambled on about inter-house wassailing as Hermione considered the offer.
It was tempting to spend the evening planning a school activity, an inter-house trivia tournament maybe, rather than brooding about Draco and the next day's trial. But she couldn't. It wouldn't be fair to her friend. "Ernie," she said softly, and he cut off his description of an inter-house candy cane relay and blinked at her. "Thank you, but I can't go to dinner with you, or help you plan an inter-house holiday activity." Her voice was gentle but firm. The Hufflepuff nodded in understanding. He scraped his chair back and stood, and when he spoke his voice was unusually crisp.
"All right then,"
he said. "Ernie," Hermione said, and he looked at her but didn't meet her eyes. "Thank you for checking up on Fix. You're a good friend." He waved away her thanks and stalked off, and Hermione slumped in her chair, feeling wretched. Then she pulled her book of case law towards her and resolutely opened it. Now she could finally make some progress. But it was not to be. Hermione's next visitor then arrived, none other than Justin Finch-Fletchley. She had never warmed to the supremely posh Muggleborn, but allowed him to join her table. This Hufflepuff carried actual books, and surely he was just here to study. Well, she couldn't have been more wrong. The snifty wizard had scored some top-drawer siren scotch and knew a nice grassy spot in the advanced herbology annex where no one ever went. Hermione couldn't even speak at first. She was so flabbergasted. What? Now she was some floozy eager to roll around with anyone holding a bottle? "Justin," Hermione said, putting down her book with a frown. "Just because I did some rather, racy dancing at Southern party last night doesn't mean I'm shagging men in greenhouses now. I know you're upset about your breakup with Hannah, but propositioning notorious witches isn't an appropriate response. Your time would be better spent studying for your newt."
"Ah, you mean porn?"
Justin said with an unsavory glint in his eyes.
"You'll help me with that, won't you, Hermione? Private lessons?"
"Do your own porn, Justin," Hermione yelled, her patience exhausted. What was wrong with people? The whole library was staring now. Justin flushed as well, then packed up his books and left in a huff, as if she was the unreasonable one. Hermione closed her eyes, seriously regretting her original decision to return to Hogwarts.
Granger.
This voice was female, thank Merlin, but icy cold. Hermione opened her eyes to see Pansy sitting opposite her now, wearing a fluffy high-necked jumper of such a pale pink it looked almost white.
Aren't you the scandal these days?
The Slytherin said.
I risk my reputation just sitting here. Are you meeting that Finchful later?
Certainly not, Hermione snapped. Pansy's eyes narrowed.
I told you not to hug Draco, she said. He's in agony over his parents and you just...
It's not what you think, Parkinson.
That boy you danced with at Fix. Nobody has seen him. I'm guessing Draco buried him in a shallow grave.
Marcus is fine, Hermione said. Pansy looked doubtful, but decided to change the subject.
Astoria said you helped her with that ridiculous necklace. Don't tell me you felt guilty about the Quidditch match.
Certainly not, Hermione said. Astoria is a menace in the air, but nobody deserves to be leashed.
Merlin, you Gryffindors really are insufferably self-righteous.
Keep that in mind in your dealings with Neville, Hermione warned. Pansy sniffed.
Don't lecture me about men, Granger. I'm not the one fighting off horny wizards in a library, and Theo seems to think he has a chance with you again.
He's delusional.
That's what I told him,
Pansy said. Hermione bent over her massive law book again, but Pansy wasn't going anywhere.
What's the plan, Granger?
She asked.
Lady Malfoy's trial is tomorrow.
Leaned forward to look at Hermione's book.
I doubt you'll find the answers in the case of Aberforth Dumbledore and his goat.
Hermione sighed and cast a Muffliato spell. Everyone thinks I have a big plan, but the situation defies analysis. I can't formulate a program of action because I don't have a clear goal. A tiny frown line appeared on Pansy's flawless forehead.
I don't understand.
Do you know about Lucius' role in the Dire Mudblood messages? Hermione asked. The formal charges against Narcissa has been published in the Prophet, but the Ministry was waiting to charge Lucius after the trial. Pansy nodded.
Neville told me.
Lucius deserves to be executed. It's only justice, Hermione said. But apparently justice will also ruin Draco's name and send him into a self-loathing spiral that precludes healthy romantic relationships. Bad outcome.
So, help his father, then?
Pansy said, waving a ringed hand. That's no better, Hermione said. I should help Lucius escape justice. Let Draco keep trying to redeem his family name, only to see his efforts unraveled by yet another parental plot. Pansy folded her hands on the table before her. Long nails the same pale pink as her jumper. Her dark eyes were hooded, her painted mouth slightly pursed.
We could make arrangements,
she said. Hermione met the other witch's eyes. Yes, I've considered that.
You think that's even possible?
Pansy asked, leaning forward intently. Of course, Hermione said calmly. He's behind magically cast iron, but there are many muggle ways to complete the job. So, but none too so. Pansy raised her eyebrows as if to ask, well? I can't, Hermione said. Then I'd be as bad as Draco's parents, committing a dark deed behind his back to protect him. It would be betrayal. Hermione and Pansy looked at each other regretfully. Shame.
So, what will you do then?
Pansy asked. I can do very little now, Hermione said. I did write the Wizengamot and say the potion Draco and I brewed that identified Lucius' blood was experimental and shouldn't be admitted as evidence. The Wizengamot doesn't need the potion anyway. They have Narcissa's confession.
A wife can't be forced to testify against her husband,
Pansy said. She rolled her eyes at Hermione's surprised look.
I've had a thorough grounding in domestic and marital wizarding law,
she smirked.
Helps with marriage contracts.
Draco won't let Narcissa retract any of her confessions, Hermione said. Pansy's pink-painted mouth turned down.
So, that's it then?
Honestly, some dark wizard Draco has. Hermione grumbled, picking up the law book again. I expected more from a Slytherin. He should be off scheming and bribing, not sacrificing love for the greater good or whatever.
You've ruined a good man, Granger, Pansy said.
Hermione's letter to the Wizengamot infuriated Kingsley, of course, since it undermined the Auror's office case against the Malfoys. The Wizengamot ruled that the blood potions test of Lucius' blood was inadmissible as evidence, which didn't surprise Hermione. The Ministry was slow to change its ways, and a shifty potion secretly developed by 2 students would not be easily accepted. Hermione had taken out a patent on the potion in her and Draco's name and submitted it to the Auror's experimental lab for testing, but it would be at least a year before it could be used in criminal cases. The case against the Malfoys now hinged on Narcissa's confession. Kingsley and Harry signed the confession as witnesses, so there was no need for their testimony, nor Draco's. Only Hermione's testimony still remained. Hermione sat beside Kingsley on the day of Narcissa's trial in the lowest row of the Wizengamot's giant circular hall. Draco was on the other side of the hall, looking like he was the one who'd spent almost 2 weeks in jail. He cast Hermione a resentful look, likely miffed about her letter to the court. Kingsley was still angry as well, but he gave Hermione a careful overview of the planned proceedings as they waited. First, the prosecutor would call Hermione to testify why she suspected Narcissa of causing the blood messages and brought her to Hogwarts. Then Kingsley would present Narcissa's confession and read it into the court record.
I know you've testified many times before, Hermione, Kingsley says, but be careful. We have the confession. All they need to know is why you brought Lady Malfoy to the castle.
He patted her hand.
You'll be just fine.
A bell rang out, and Narcissa entered the courtroom. She took the accused's chair in the center, the magical chains clamping on her wrists. Draco flinched at the clicking sound. Narcissa wore simple black robes and no jewellery, looking like a blonde Mary Queen of Scots on trial for her life. In charge of the proceedings was Chief Warlock Mathilda Croon, a rather hag-like witch with a long warty nose and a faintly green tinge to her skin. Rumour had it even Kingsley was afraid of her. Croon read the charges against Narcissa, 14 in all. Narcissa sat as still as stone, but her eyes occasionally flicked over to her son. The prosecutor, a portly middle-aged wizard in spectacles, then called Hermione to stand on a small witness dais. Hermione was wearing her most conservative robes, the same long blue ones she'd worn to testify at the summer trials. Her hair was pulled sharply back with a single Gloriana pin buried inside a knot of curl. Narcissa's gaze shifted to her, and Hermione found it difficult to look into those cold blue eyes. She reminded herself that Draco's mother had broken the law and cast a dark spell on Hogwarts. Frankly, Hermione thought the woman a bit mad. Must run in the family. Questioned by the prosecutor, Hermione described a chain of logic that had convinced her that Narcissa had cast a spell. Look, Belle, our Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher said the spell wasn't a curse, but I didn't believe it at first, Hermione said.
What made you think of a protection spell rather than a curse?
The prosecutor asked. Hermione cleared her throat. Each of the 3 messages appeared after Draco Malfoy was attacked by a Muggleborn. On September 8th, the night of a party at the Gryffindor Tower, Dennis Creevy tried to hex Mr. Malfoy in revenge for his brother's death. Mr. Creevy was flung into a wall, and the next morning we found the Die Mudblood messages. 3 days later, I tried to hex Mr. Malfoy in the hallway before Ancient Rooms. I felt something pull me against the stone wall, forcing me to drop my wand, and the next morning there was a message.
A moment, Miss Granger, the prosecutor said. Why did you attempt to hex Draco Malfoy?
Hermione tried not to blush. He read my journal.
You tried to hex Mr. Malfoy because he read your journal?
Yes. Great, now the entire wizarding world will wonder what I wrote. She risked a look at Draco, who smirked slightly. Mr. Malfoy is also very irritating, she added. I'm sure many people would happily testify to that fact. Half the courtroom nodded. The court then produced a recent picture of Hermione and Draco in the entrance hall, and she had to do a little fast talking to keep Ron and his Death Eater whore rent out of the court record. She and Mr. Malfoy were arguing, she said. Mr. Malfoy was annoyed she wasn't at Quidditch match, and he pulled his wand. "I've been a little impulsive since the war," she said, shamelessly playing that card. She could see Harry in an upper row rolling his eyes. "Mr. Malfoy didn't mean me any harm, but again, he's very irritating." A good number of spectators, including Harry and Kingsley, nodded again in agreement. Narcissa frowned. "The point," Hermione said, "is that when I tried to hex Mr. Malfoy, a stone block in the ceiling fell, smashing the, cabinet behind me. Mr. Malfoy pushed me out of the way. The next day, the Die Mudblood messages was written in blood on the stone." She took a deep breath. 3 messages appearing 3 times after Draco Malfoy was threatened by a Muggleborn. And the messengers didn't start appearing until Narcissa Malfoy visited Hogwarts on September 1st.
"I have a question, Miss Granger,"
said Crone.
"You are operated on a very limited time frame. You used to say this spell was cast after students returned to school. Why not during the summer or even during the war?"
Damn. Hermione had hoped nobody would notice that. She couldn't help the faint heat in her cheeks. "I am a frozen, unruffled pond. Because I successfully petrified Mr. Malfoy on September 5th, she admitted. A ripple ran through the court and spectators, and Draco was openly smirking now. She didn't wait for the chief warlock to ask, just spelled ahead. "He promised to show me the Codex Renegade, but he failed to bring it." She glared at Draco, whose smirk had widened into a smile.
"The Codex what?"
the judge asked. "It's a rare 14th century manuscript that precedes the 4th iteration of the Elder Foobox," Hermione recited glibly. Narcissa looked outraged.
"Is that why you hexed him, because he didn't bring the Codex?"
Crone asked. "Damn, too bad I'm under oath. That would have been a great excuse." "No," she admitted, carefully not looking at Draco. "He walked towards me in a possibly threatening manner, after I took off my clothes."
"And so you petrified him?"
the chief warlock said flatly. "Just a little," Hermione said. "The point is, the spell worked perfectly, nothing happened to me, and no blood messages appeared. That was the day before Narcissa Malfoy visited the school, and 3 days after that, Dennis Creevy was stopped from hexing Mr. Malfoy, and the first Die Mudblood's messages appeared." The entire Wizengamot looked dubious, as well it might, and Hermione took a moment to thank Merlin that Narcissa had confessed to the auras. Hermione didn't have to prove that Narcissa cast the spell, simply explained why she thought Narcissa did so. The prosecutor let her go, and Hermione returned to her seat, casting a glare at Draco on her way and receiving another smirk that warmed her heart.
"You did well,"
Kingsley whispered.
"Thank you for not."
The head aura trailed off, staring at the center of the courtroom. The prosecutor had unrolled the parchment containing Narcissa's official confession and was gasping in shock.
"No,"
the prosecutor cried. He shoved his spectacles up his balding forehead and glared at Narcissa, who looked a little smug.
"Chief Warlock Crone,"
the prosecutor said.
"In light of changes to this confession, I request a moment with Head Aura Shacklebolt."
This was granted, and the courtroom buzzed as Kingsley left his seat to huddle with his prosecutor. Draco looked at the 2 ministry officials with narrowed eyes, then shifted his gaze to Hermione as if the disruption was her fault. Hermione shrugged back. She honestly had no idea what was going on. Draco still looked suspicious, undoubtedly thinking of Hermione's innocent look at the inter-house Quidditch match. Kingsley stormed back to his seat beside Hermione. "What happened?" Hermione whispered.
"Narcissa recanted parts of her confession," he hissed back. "She said she identified the blood as Lucius because she was frightened, but that was hers all along."
Hermione stared at Kingsley, shocked. Narcissa was taking the fall for the crime, and the auras had better do it because, as Pansy had said, no witch or wizard could be forced to testify against the spouse. Hermione looked from Narcissa's still more smug face to Draco, who appeared baffled. Well, he'd figure it out soon enough. Kingsley's voice shook with rage.
"That's it then. There's no case at all against Lucius. You won't lose so much as a pudding with dinner."
Ron called Kingsley to read the confession and had Aura strode over to the small dais. As he read the confession in freezing tones, Draco's face went from bafflement to suspicion to outright shock. Then he stared at his mother in horror.
"Will you have anything to add to your registered confession, Lady Malfoy?"
The prosecutor asked coldly. Yes. Narcissa's voice was entirely composed. She should have been giving a toast at a garden party. When I cast that spell, it was not my intention to threaten or frighten Muggleborns, she said. Their hatred against Muggles runs very deep in the Black family as well as the Malfoys. I did not take this into account. Her voice quivered slightly. I thought I was protecting my son, but I was wrong. He didn't need my protection, and I only endangered him further, and likely destroyed his happiness. I submit myself to the ruling of the Wizengamot. The eyes of the entire courtroom turned irresistibly to Draco, who sat white and unmoving. A murmur ran through the crowd. Wizengamot members and spectators alike, and Hermione couldn't tell if they were hostile to Draco or not. Narcissa was quickly found guilty of all charges except the conspiracy-related ones, although Hermione knew there would be speculation about a possible co-conspirator. Draco would be the most likely suspect. Ron then handed the final sentence down. A confiscated wand and 6 months in Azkaban, then another 5 years of house arrest. Narcissa appeared resigned, but Draco looked devastated. When the court was adjourned, he moved immediately toward his mother without a look at Hermione. Kingsley was with the prosecutors again, his face thunderous.
"Miss Granger?"
Hermione tore her eyes from the back of Draco's head to see Headmistress McGonagall standing there in her tall hat, eyes kind behind her spectacles.
"I understand how you must feel."
Really? Hermione asked bitterly. Because I have no idea how I feel. I've put Draco's mother in Azkaban, yet Lucius goes free.
Lady Malfoy put herself in Azkaban.
McGonagall's voice was cool.
She deserves that sentence. She knows it, you know it, and in time young Mr. Malfoy will realize it. Lady Malfoy made a terrible mistake, and if it weren't for the two of you, that spell would have haunted Hogwarts for generations.
Hermione looked around. Most of the crowd had departed. The remainder huddled in little groups. Narcissa, Draco, and the Aurors, including Harry, were gone.
Lady Malfoy saved her husband's life today.
McGonagall went on. I wonder who got to her, Hermione said darkly.
Perhaps no one did,
the headmistress said.
Today, this courtroom was another battleground in the war, and I believe once again Lady Malfoy has used her own judgment to save her family.
Despite McGonagall's word, Hermione remained conflicted about the outcome of Narcissa's trial. Lucius may have escaped execution, but his and Narcissa's action had still severely damaged the Malfoy name. Hermione flew back to Hogwarts with the headmistress, but she didn't go to class. She went to her bedroom instead, where Ginny found Hermione hours later staring into the fire, still wearing her courtroom robe. Ginny sat beside her on the sofa, and Crookshanks jumped up between them for double the petting.
The ministry released a statement,
the redhead said quietly.
McGonagall had all teachers read it aloud. I can't believe it. Narcissa really took all the blame.
Yes, Hermione said, still staring at the fire as she absently stroked Crookshanks.
Where's Draco?
He and Harry are escorting Narcissa to Azkaban. Harry had sent Hermione an owl writing that Narcissa was being settled on the prison's lowest minimum security floor.
What will Draco do? Are you back together now? It's not going to be like it before, is it?
Ginny asked.
You know where you both deny your feelings and throw almighty scenes, because I'm not up for another round of that.
Hermione sniffed. She couldn't speak for Draco, but all of her scenes had been entirely justified. I don't know. It all depends on him, but no matter what happens, my behavior will be above reproach. Ginny looked skeptical. Seriously, Hermione said. I promised Lila I would be a better role model in my personal affairs. although she said if I ever felt moved to hex Percival, I would have her full support. Ginny raised her eyebrows.
Inter-house unity, perhaps?
Hermione smiled for the first time since the trial. Maybe someday. Draco didn't return to the castle for dinner, and he didn't appear anywhere on the Marauders' map. The map only covered the castle, so Hermione headed out to the grounds, still wearing her courtroom robes. She didn't find him in the greenhouses or in the Quidditch pitch. She even checked Hagrid's hut. Her chest tightened. Tomorrow was a school day, and Draco needed to return to Hogwarts by midnight or he'd violate his probation. Midnight came and went, and Hermione lay sleepless in bed with Crookshanks curled beside her. Where could Draco be? Perhaps the ministry spell had already been activated. Perhaps an owl had already arrived with the notice of a hearing before the Wizengamot, like Harry had received after blowing up his aunt. Except Harry had been an underage wizard using accidental magic, not an AWOL, former Death Eater on parole. He finally dozed off, exhausted, and dreamed of the Sharon bearing her and Ron to Azkaban in chains.
"Oh, I hope someone brings us socks," Ron was saying.
Couldn't answer because just then they were attacked by nose-biting teacups. Lucius appeared in the captain's hat and turned all the teacups into diamonds, which he strung on a chain and placed around Hermione's neck.
"Right for her,"
he whispered, pulling her. Hermione sat up, a scream in her throat. A single silver light had appeared in the dark room, and Crookshanks yelled softly. She grabbed her wand as the light floated closer, no bigger than a candle's flame. Hermione froze, wand still upraised, and as the light hovered before her eyes, it was a tiny otter, the smallest Patronus she'd ever seen.
"Entrance gate,"
the otter said in a tiny voice almost too faint to be heard. The teeny Patronus vanished, and Hermione immediately slid out of bed and shoved her socked feet into boots. Draco! To be continued. Next up, moonlight on the Hogwarts ground. Thank you for listening to this chapter of the Gloriana set by ThebeMoon. If you'd like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.